The little town of Willow Creek was alive with the sound of chatter and curiosity that bright afternoon. The wedding was all anyone could talk about. Folks leaned on wooden fences, whispering and chuckling as the old white church bell prepared to ring. The air smelled of dust, lilacs, and gossip. When the horse-drawn carriage came to a stop in front of the church, every head turned. Out stepped Clara Mayfield, her heart beating so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Her dress shimmered in the sun, white satin with lace trimming, stitched carefully by her own hands. It was beautiful, though it tugged a little at her waist, and her veil didn't quite hide her round, flushed cheeks. She clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers, picked from the fields that morning, their stems trembling slightly in her grip. People started whispering before she even reached the church steps. "Is that her?" one woman murmured to another. "She's bigger than I imagined," came the reply. "I suppose Daniel Brooks couldn't find anyone else," someone else muttered with a dry laugh. Clara's ears burned. Each word felt like a stone being thrown, one after another. She tried to focus on the music coming from inside the church, the soft notes of the piano, but the whispers followed her like shadows. Inside, Cowboy Daniel Brooks stood near the altar, his hat held respectfully at his side. The man had a quiet, solid presence, the kind that could silence a rowdy saloon with just one look. His sun-tanned face and kind eyes told stories of hard work and heartbreak. He hadn't smiled much since his wife passed away 3 years ago, leaving him to raise his daughter alone. But today, there was warmth on his face again. When he saw Clara standing at the entrance, something inside him softened. She wasn't perfect by the world's standards, but to him, she was everything that mattered, gentle, loyal, and kind to his little girl. He'd seen her helping Ella learn to ride, baking pies in the kitchen, humming lullabies that brought peace back into their home. As the church doors creaked open, the crowd fell quiet. Clara took her first step down the aisle. Her heart thudded painfully. She saw faces she'd known since childhood, neighbors, shopkeepers, even the blacksmith's wife, watching her with judgment thinly veiled behind polite smiles. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into her veil, but then her eyes met Daniel's. His smile was steady, the kind of smile that said, "You belong right here." She took another step, then another. By the time she reached him, her knees were weak, and her hands trembled. Daniel reached out and took them in his, warm and firm. "You look perfect, Clara," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper but strong enough to steady her heart. A tear escaped before she could stop it. "Even if everyone thinks otherwise?" she asked shakily. He gave a short, quiet laugh. "They don't see what I see." Her lips parted, but before she could reply, someone coughed pointedly from the pews, followed by a few stifled giggles. The sound sliced through her moment of peace. Her gaze fell to the floor, shame rising again, until a small voice spoke. It was Ella, Daniel's 6-year-old daughter. She stood at the front pew, her brown curls bouncing as she turned toward her father. Her white dress had a smudge of dirt on the hem, and her hands clutched a tiny bouquet of daisies she'd picked that morning. She tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "she's beautiful." Daniel froze, his heart catching in his chest. Then Ella lifted her chin, looked straight at the congregation, and said louder, "She's beautiful, Daddy, just like a princess." The church went utterly silent. Every whisper, every mocking smirk vanished as the child's words echoed through the space. Even the preacher paused, his eyes softening behind his glasses. The air was thick with something no one could quite name: shame, awe, truth. Clara stared at Ella, stunned. Her throat tightened as her heart swelled with emotion she couldn't contain. She hadn't expected kindness today, not from this crowd. Yet, it came from the purest heart in the room, a little girl who saw beauty where adults saw flaws. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. He smiled, his voice gentle but firm. "You see, Clara, my little girl's got better eyes than the rest of them." Clara let out a shaky laugh, the tears falling freely now. The priest cleared his throat, composing himself. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony went on quietly after that. The words of love and promise filled the small church. Daniel spoke his vows slowly, deliberately, as if carving each word into time itself. "I promise to love you for who you are," he said, looking into her tear-filled eyes. "Not for how you look, not for what others say, but for the heart that's changed my home." Clara could barely speak, but she managed to whisper, "And I promise to stand by you and your little girl, always." When they exchanged rings, the entire church seemed to breathe again. The laughter that once mocked her now turned into applause. Some people even smiled, touched by what they'd witnessed. As the doors opened and they stepped into the sunlight, Clara blinked against the glow. Ella was the first to run ahead, scattering petals from a small basket she'd insisted on carrying. "For the prettiest bride in the world," she squealed, her laughter pure and bright. The crowd followed them outside, the same townsfolk who had once whispered now cheering and clapping. A few women wiped their eyes, even the blacksmith gave a proud nod. Clara held Daniel's arm tightly, her head high. For once, she wasn't hiding behind her dress or her weight. She wasn't the poor choice, or the unusual bride. She was simply loved. As the carriage rolled away, the sound of bells filled the air, not the bells of gossip or mockery, but of new beginnings. Inside, Clara looked at Daniel and whispered, "I'll never forget what Ella said today." He smiled, glancing out the window at his little girl perched between them. "That's because she told the truth." Clara reached over and took Ella's small hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, sweetheart." Ella grinned, her tiny teeth flashing in the sunlight. "You're welcome, Mommy." Clara froze at the word. Daniel chuckled softly, and her eyes filled again, this time not from pain, but from something deep, healing, and real. As the carriage carried them toward the horizon, the townsfolk faded behind them, but the echo of that little girl's voice remained in Clara's heart. "She's beautiful, Daddy." The sun was sinking behind the golden hills of Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty fields. The wedding guests had gone, leaving behind ribbons fluttering in the evening breeze and half-empty glasses on the porch rail. The ranch, once filled with laughter and music, was quiet now, peaceful in a way that made the heart slow down and listen. Clara stood barefoot on the porch in her wedding dress. The hem was dusty, the lace slightly torn, but she didn't care. The fabric still carried the scent of wildflowers and candles from the church. Her hair, once perfectly pinned, had fallen loose around her shoulders, and strands of it danced in the warm wind. Daniel came out of the house carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He handed one to her, the way a man offers something not just out of habit but out of care. She smiled faintly as she took it, feeling the warmth spread through her hands. For a long moment, they didn't speak. The only sounds were the soft creaking of the porch boards and the distant chirping of crickets. The sky was a swirl of colors, orange fading into pink, pink melting into violet. "I never thought I'd see this day," Daniel said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. Clara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the dying light. "Neither did I," she admitted softly. "When I heard them whispering today, I almost turned back." Daniel rested his mug on the railing and leaned beside her. "You shouldn't have to listen to them," he said. "People like to talk when their own lives are empty. Let them talk." She stared out at the wide open land, the fields stretching endlessly toward the horizon. "It's not easy to ignore. I've been laughed at my whole life, Daniel. In school, in town, even at church. Sometimes I think the world doesn't know what to do with someone like me." He turned to her, his eyes calm but steady. "I know exactly what to do with someone like you," he said quietly. "You love deeply. You take care of people. You've made Ella laugh again. You've brought light back into this house. That's what I see." Her throat tightened. She set down her cup, her fingers trembling slightly. "When you say things like that, I almost start to believe them." "You should," he replied. "You deserve to." The porch door creaked open before Clara could respond. A small, sleepy voice called out, "Daddy." "Clara." It was Ella, in her white nightgown, her hair sticking out in soft curls. She clutched a piece of paper in her hands and ran to them with excitement lighting up her face. "Look what I made," she said proudly, holding out her drawing. Clara knelt down, the boards cool under her bare feet. Ella handed her the crayon-covered paper, and Clara's heart swelled at the sight of it. The picture showed 3 stick figures standing under a big yellow sun, 1 tall man in a cowboy hat, 1 round woman in a white dress, and 1 little girl with curls. Above them, written in wobbly letters, were the words, "My family heart." Clara's lips trembled. She looked up at the child, her voice breaking. "Oh, Ella, It's beautiful. Ella giggled, her eyes shining with pride. You're beautiful too, Mommy. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The word hung in the air, Mommy. It was soft, innocent, and full of truth. Daniel's eyes glistened, his chest tightening with emotion. He hadn't told his daughter to say it. She had chosen it on her own. Clara pulled Ella into her arms and hugged her tightly, burying her face in the child's hair. I love you, sweetheart, she whispered. I love you too, Ella murmured sleepily against her shoulder. Daniel knelt beside them and placed his hand gently on both of them. The three of them stayed like that for a moment, quiet, close, whole. Then he lifted Ella in his arms and smiled. Bedtime for you, little lady. Ella nodded drowsily. Okay, Daddy. After tucking her into bed, Daniel returned to the porch. Clara was still there, leaning against the railing, staring out at the fields glowing silver under the moonlight. The air had turned cool, and she had draped a shawl over her shoulders. He joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. For a moment, they stood in silence again, watching the fireflies blink in the tall grass. Do you ever think about what comes next? She asked softly. Daniel looked at her, his expression tender. Every day, but for once, I'm not afraid of it. You and Ella, you've made me believe in something steady again. Clara smiled faintly. It feels strange, being wanted, being seen. He brushed his thumb along her cheek. You've always deserved to be seen. The world's just slow to notice real beauty. Her eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't look away this time. You really think I'm beautiful? He leaned in close, his voice deep and steady. Clara, you were beautiful long before I ever laid eyes on you. The way you care for people, the way you smile even when you're hurt, that's the kind of beauty that doesn't fade. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she was smiling as it fell. You make me feel like I belong somewhere, she whispered. You do, he said simply. Right here. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of Ella's wildflowers. The world felt soft, almost sacred. The stars were beginning to appear, tiny lights scattered across the velvet sky. Inside, Ella's soft voice carried faintly through the open window. Good night, Mommy, she murmured in her sleep. Clara froze, her hand flying to her heart. Daniel smiled as he heard it too. She turned toward him, tears glimmering in her eyes. Did you hear that? I did, he said gently. And I think that's her way of saying she's happy. Clara looked back at the sky, her heart full to the brim. The weight she had carried for years, the shame, the judgment, the loneliness, seemed to melt away. For the first time, she felt entirely enough. Daniel's arm stayed around her, steady and warm. They stood like that until the stars took over the sky, and the house behind them glowed faintly with lamplight. Thank you, Clara whispered finally, for choosing me when no one else would. Daniel shook his head, his voice soft but sure. No, Clara, you've got it wrong. You chose me first, just by showing up with kindness when I'd forgotten what it was. You gave Ella back her laughter. You gave me back my life. Clara looked at him, her eyes shining. Then I guess we saved each other. He smiled. Guess we did. As the night deepened, Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. The porch light flickered, and the moon bathed the ranch in silver. Somewhere in the fields, a nightingale began to sing.